you shall hear a tale or two from the mythology of the Northmen, those early Scandinavians who came from Norway and Sweden and Denmark to England and Iceland and even as far as our own country before Columbus discovered it. And of course they took the stories of their gods and their heroes with them wherever they went. Many of their tales were about a personage called Loki, who was mischief maker of the gods. Loki, though counted among the heavenly powers of the Norse mythology, was not himself a god. His name means light, as the name Lucifer means bearer of light. But Loki, like Lucifer, was not in any way a benefactor, whom you may think provided light or warmth to mankind. No, just the opposite. He, like Lucifer, represented uncontrollable and destructive fire. For Loki, son of Farbauti the giant, was born when lightning first struck a tree and ignited a forest, leaving it scorched and barren. Loki was handsome in a slick sort of way, but only on the surface. Inwardly he was jealous, spiteful, and mean. He was a coward and a trickster and a thief, for he stole the golden hair of the goddess Sif, wife of Thor, the priceless necklace Brisingamen, which belonged to the goddess Freya, and he was responsible for the abduction of the goddess Iduna for a time, along with her magic apples, which provided the gods with beauty and with everlasting youth. There was much cause in heaven and on earth for all to despise Loki. But though he was not a god, he was cleverly able to insinuate himself among the gods by being of some help to them when they needed help, for he was ever crafty and cunning. Once, for instance, the gods were on the verge of losing Freya, goddess of love and beauty, not to mention the sun and the moon with her, to a giant who promised to build an impenetrable wall around Asgard, home of the gods. In one winter he promised it, with only his horse Svadilfari to help him. When the giant, who had disguised himself as a mason, came within 3 days of completing the work and receiving his prizes, it was Loki who spoiled his success by becoming a white mare, which lured the giant's horse helper away, so that the work could not be completed. The giant mason was in the end killed by the gods, but out of the union of the 2 horses came a colt with 8 legs, whom Odin named Sleipnir, and kept forever after as his own remarkable steed. But though he was of service to the gods on that particular occasion, he was just as often helpful to the enemies of Asgard, the giants in Jotunheim. For as his greatest loyalty lay always with himself and his own self-interests, he also agreed to help Thiassi, the storm giant, to kidnap Iduna, as I have said. Then, after tricking Iduna and securing her and her magic apples for the giant, Loki turned right around and also agreed to help the gods retrieve her, but for a price. If Odin, father of the gods, would make him his blood brother, allowing Loki freely to enter Asgard and benefiting from the hospitality and protection he must receive there. After a time, Loki became more and more evil. His trickery grew more cruel and cunning. His once amusing impudence became mere slyness. And he proved to be more and more of a threat to the gods and to mankind, especially in regard to the foul brood he fathered by an ogress of giant land called Angerboda. These children of Loki and the giantess were 3 of the most horrible and evil monsters the world has ever known. Odin, when he finally learned of their existence, commanded them to his presence, and they were such awful monsters as made the goddesses of heaven, Frigga, Sif, Iduna, and Freya, turn pale at the sight of them. The youngest was Hela, whose body was composed of half-living, half-rotting flesh. The second was a serpent full of venom, who grew larger day by day. The eldest was the biggest and fiercest of wolves, called Fenris, father of all wolves and werewolves to come. Now, Odin could not kill these creatures of evil, for he, like they, were bound by fate to exist until Ragnarok, the last great battle, which would come at the end of the world and be between the gods, with all heroes who had ever fallen in battle, and the giants, with death and destruction there following. Therefore Odin could only put these monsters as far as possible out of the way of the gods and mankind. The serpent, therefore, he cast into the sea, which rings the earth, and there the beast grew until he came full cycle round the world and gripped his tail in his dragon jaws. Men called him the Midgard serpent, and sailors especially feared him. Hel he cast down, down to the bottom of 9 worlds, to Helheim, and there he gave her absolute power over all who were sent to her. That was, anyone who died of sickness, or accident, or old age, and not on the battlefield. The Fenris wolf, however, Odin kept in Asgard, hoping to find a chain strong enough to hold him down until the fatal day of Ragnarok arrived. Twice the gods attempted to bind the wolf, who grew larger and more vicious day by day, and twice they failed. Then they went to the dwarfs, who were master craftsmen and skilled in the dark arts of enchantment, and they bid the dwarfs devise a fetter for the beast. This they did, and they called the chain they fashioned Gleipnir. It was soft as thistledown and light as air, yet it could not be broken by the monster, for it was made of 6 ingredients not readily to be found by mortals: the noise of the footfalls of a cat, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the saliva of a bird. And this chain Gleipnir held the Fenris wolf, and he was bound at last to the foot of a lofty crag. And for good measure, a sword was wedged between his jaws, the point piercing the roof of his mouth until a river of blood flowed from it. And that river was called Van. Loki's 3 children were banished until the end of the world, and mankind was happy for a time, and the gods were happy. They went back to Asgard with light hearts, and they feasted far into the night in the hall of heroes, Valhalla. And Loki made merry with the rest of them. But inwardly he craved revenge, especially against the mighty Thor, who forever taunted him for what he was, a coward and a friend of giants. That very night, therefore, Loki determined to steal the long golden tresses of Thor's wife, Sif. When Thor awoke next morning and found his wife's head had been shaved clean, his rage was terrible to see and more terrible to hear. He called all over Asgard for Loki, for he knew, and all the gods knew, only Loki could have done such an ugly thing. Thor was determined to break Loki into little pieces and scatter him all over Jotunheim. For even Thor was bound by the oath that kept all, even Loki, from harm within the boundaries of Asgard. And to Giantland Thor began to drag the evil little being, while Loki screamed and begged for his life. And though Thor shook him till his teeth rattled, Loki continued to argue that he should be kept alive, because only he could get Sif's hair back for her again. "Unless you can put back the hair which you have cut off, so that it grows again upon Sif's head, I'll break your bones and crush you under a mountain, so that you can work no more mischief, ever." I will, cried Loki. "Put me down, listen to me." Thor set him on his feet, but did not let go his hold. "Well, How will you replace the hair you have dared to cut from Sif's head?" "The 4 dwarfs, those who made the chain Gleipnir," cried Loki. "Those 4 sons of Ivaldi who live in Svartalfheim can make new hair if anyone can. Let me go to them. I will also pay a fine for all the trouble I've caused. If you break my bones, Sif will never get her hair again. But if you let me go now to Svartalfheim, there is every chance she may get her hair. You will lose nothing by letting me try. You may lose everything if you don't." Thor took a little while to see this, but finally he flung Loki from him, shouting, "Go to Svartalfheim then. Do your best with the sons of Ivaldi. But don't think to escape me if you fail. Wherever you are, I'll find you." Loki picked himself up, muttering curses on Thor under his breath, set out from Asgard toward the land of the dark elves. Over the Rainbow Bridge he went, and through Middle-earth, into the gloomy caverns beneath which dwelt the dwarfs and their cousins, the dark elves. Down into the caves went Loki by winding passage and steep stair, till finally he heard, in the distance before him, the clink of hammer on anvil, and then he saw the red glow from the forges of the dwarfs. He came out into the cavernous underworld where the dwarfs were at work, digging the gold and the iron and the jewels from the rocks, working them into beautiful swords, cups, necklaces, armors, and other treasures. Loki found the sons of Ivaldi, and when he had told them what he wanted, the master craftsman Dvalin exclaimed, "This will bring us great honor and glory among the gods. Let us set to work at once, brothers. Let us show them how great is our skill." And they put gold into the fire, and they began to work, and the bellows roared, and the sparks flew. And first clever Dvalin made the spear Gungnir as a gift for Odin, the best of all spears that never fails to hit its mark. Next, they made a ship called Skidbladnir as a gift for Frey, Lord of the Winds. This the best of all ships, for it can sail over land as well as sea, and through the air also, no matter which way the wind blows. And it could carry all the gods with their steeds at one time, and yet be able to be folded up small enough to carry in a warrior's belt. Last of all, Dvalin spun golden thread, finer than ever was drawn from mortal spinning wheel, and made from it new hair for Sif. "And," he told Loki, "if this be placed upon her head, it will grow there at once, just as her own hair did. Also I have put into it a charm, that it may never again be stolen by force or by cunning." Now Loki was delighted. Certain he was now that he was safe from Thor's vengeance and the anger of all the gods. He cried to Dvalin, "You are greatest of all the smiths. Not in Midgard nor in Asgard, nor even here among the black dwarfs is there any other who could fashion such cunning and such wondrous gifts." Now, as Loki bragged, it chanced that another dwarf called Brock heard what he said, and Brock sprang up in a great rage. "That is not true. My brother Sindri is a better smith than Dvalin. I can wager my head upon that." Loki saw his chance, and he said, "I'll take your wager. My head against yours, that your brother Sindri cannot make 3 gifts for the gods, more rare and more wonderful than Dvalin has done." Then Brock led the way to Sindi's smithy, and the dwarf smith grinned and nodded when he heard the bet. "I'll do better than Dvalin, son of Ivaldi, ever did. Gungnir, Skidbladnir, hair for Sif, bah! Wait till you see my gifts for the gods." Then Sindri mingled his metals and poured into it his charms, and when this was done, he set a pigskin bellows upon the hearth, and he told his brother Brock to blow until he came back. "Blow hard," he said to his brother. "Do not cease for a moment, however, not even to mop your brow, not even to draw a breath, for if you pause for anything whatsoever, that which lies in the fire will be spoiled." Then Brock went out into another cave. Loki, with a sly look in his eyes, stole quietly out of the smithy in the opposite direction and turned himself into a stinging insect. Then, as the dwarf worked at the bellows, Loki, in disguise as a gadfly, came and stung him on the hand until the blood ran. But Brock never even paused to dash it away. Sindri came back a few minutes later and drew from the fire a live boar with golden bristles and mane of gleaming gold. "Good," he said, "Gullinbusti is complete. Now, brother, blow the bellows again, and do not stop for a moment, or my next work will be spoiled." With that, he laid more gold in the hearth, and he went out of the smithy again, and presently as Brock toiled at the bellows, the gadfly, which was Loki, came again and stung him on the neck until the blood ran, but the dwarf never even paused to dash it away. Sindri came back a few minutes later, and he drew from the fire a glimmering ring of gold. "Good," he said, "Draupnir is complete. Now, work the bellows again, brother, and do not stop for a moment, or my last and greatest work will be spoiled." And with that, he laid a great mass of iron on the hearth, and he went out of the smithy again. Presently, as Brock worked at the bellows, Loki, as a gadfly, came once more and stung him on the eyelid until the blood came and poured down into his eye so that he could not see what he was doing. Then Brock grabbed at the gadfly, quickly as he could, and dashed the blood out of his eye. And though it was very quick, the bellows grew flat for a moment. Then Sindri came back and drew from the fire a great iron hammer. "Ah," he said, "Mjolnir came near to being spoiled. See, it is a little too short in the handle, yet even so I am certain that you have blown the bellows well enough that you will win your wager, Brother Brock. So now take our 3 gifts. Hasten to Asgard. Lay them before the gods for their judgment." Loki had come back to the smithy in his own form now, and he looked at Brock's gifts. He was beginning to feel a bit anxious about which the gods would consider the best. However, he set out for Asgard with Dvalin and Brock, and when they arrived, the gods assembled, and Loki explained the presence of the 2 dwarfs and told about the wager, and then Odin, Thor, and Frey sat down in the seats of judgment, and Loki advanced with Dvalin behind him. First, Thor took the hair and set it upon Sif's head. Immediately it grew there as if it had never been lost. She tossed back her head and smiled once more. Then Loki handed the spear Gungnir to Odin, explaining how it could never miss its mark nor be stopped in its thrust, whatever came in its way. Finally, he gave the ship Skidbladnir to Frey, telling him how it would speed him over land or sea with a favorable breeze as soon as the sail was raised, yet could be folded like a napkin and held in the hand. The 3 gods admired their gifts, and Father Odin said, "Dwarf Brock, it will indeed be hard for you to surpass these 3 gifts. Never before did I behold such workmanship." Brock, however, stepped forward with a confident bow, and first of all he gave to Odin the ring Draupnir. "Here, my lord, is the gift of greatest wealth," he said. "Keep the ring well, and on every 9th night shall fall from it 8 rings of equal value." Then he stepped up to the god Frey and gave him the boar Gullinbusti, saying, "There, my lord, is the gift of greatest speed. Keep this boar well, for he can run through air or water better than any horse, and moreover, such a glow of light comes from his mane and bristles, you can never be lost in the dark, even though you pass through deepest Niflheim itself." Last of all, he gave to Thor the hammer Mjolnir, and he said, "Here, my lord, is the gift of greatest strength. Keep this hammer well, for it shall never fail you. You may smite with it as hard as you will, and break whatever you hit. If you throw it at anything, it will hit that at which you fling it, and then return to your hand however far it goes. Yet you see it is so small you may carry it in your belt. I must be honest, however, and tell you that there is one flaw in its making. The handle is a trifle short." Now after this, the 3 gods discussed the gifts among themselves, and then Odin gave judgment. "We feel," he said, "that the hammer Mjolnir is the most precious of all these works, since in it is the greatest defense we have against the giants, our deadly enemies. Therefore we give this sentence. The dwarf Brock has won his wager, and Loki must lose his head." Brock at once produced a sharp axe and advanced gleefully upon his victim. "One moment!" exclaimed Loki. And the dwarf paused. Yes, I confess myself beaten. You will spare me my head, no, and you must come and cut it off. Yes, well, here I stand waiting for you to strike, but of course you will remember it was only my head that I wagered. That belongs to you, certainly, but my neck is mine, so be very careful when you cut off my head. You do not touch my neck, for every scrap of it is mine, and I forbid you to touch it, and of course, when I wagered my head, I meant the whole of it. You must take it all in one piece, and leave none behind. Well, there were a few moments of silence, and then a great gust of laughter swept through Valhalla while Brock stood swinging his axe foolishly. I will not cut off your head then, he said at length, but just to warn you against boasting in future, I'll sew your lips together. You talk too much, as I am sure the noble gods will agree. A little silence will do you no harm. Loki agreed to this, and thankfully, for it was a small matter compared to the loss of his head. And Brock set to work, but found his knife was too blunt to pierce the flesh of Loki. I wish I had my brother Sindri's awl here, he cried, and as he said the words, Sindri's awl appeared suddenly, piercing Loki's lips, and Brock laced them together with a thong. Then all the gods laughed at Loki standing dumbly there with just out one of his usual jests to throw at them, and they cried, Take a horn of mead with us, Loki. Sing to us, Loki. Sing a song of battle. Tell us a tale of your triumphs. And they laughed, and Loki endured all this mockery with downcast eyes. And when the gods were tired of their sport, and the two dwarfs had departed from Asgard, he went quietly to his own palace and tore away the thong. But ever afterward his lips were scarred and uneven, and his smile was wicked, where it had only been cunning before. Perhaps you will be satisfied to know that for all his mischief and misdeeds then and afterwards, he was finally punished. And though Loki eluded the gods for a time by living at the top of a certain mountain on which he built himself a house with 4 doors so that he could see out in every direction for the coming of the gods, most of the day he lived as a salmon and hid in the deep river beside the house, or behind a screen of falling water called Franninger Falls. He thought to himself, They can never catch me here. But he was wrong. Father Odin, with his all-seeing eye, found out where Loki was hiding. And they came to the place. And they thought he probably was hiding as a fish. And they devised a net that could catch him. And they dragged the river until Loki, as a salmon, was forced to jump clear of the net or be swept into the sea, where he knew sea monsters would find him. As he leapt the net, Thor caught him by the tail and squeezed him so hard that salmon have narrow tails to this day. Loki was forced to take his own form again, and since he was caught outside of Asgard, no laws of hospitality protected him. The gods bound him with thongs made of the sinews of one of his sons, who was killed by another of his sons. And then they turned those sinews into iron, and drew them through holes in each of 3 great rocks far underground. Then they took a poisonous snake and hung it above Loki's face, so that poison must drip down upon him and cause him to writhe in pain. His faithful wife, Sigyn, was permitted to stay with him, to catch the falling venom in a cup which she tirelessly held above his head. But when the cup grew full, and she had to leave him to empty it, then the poison fell once more upon the face of the evil Loki, and then the earth trembled and shook, and men felt the earthquake. Of course, the one story that shows just how truly evil Loki finally became before he was punished is the one about how he caused the death of the god Baldur the Beautiful, and brought about the twilight of the gods and the coming of their doom. But that story I must leave for another time. Perhaps you will want to read it for yourself. Visit your public library and ask for stories about the Northmen.